Good morning, my name's Peter Wooding and thank you for joining us. Today's session we look at infrastructure from both public and private perspective, and Colin Herron has kindly agreed to have a keynote at the beginning, set the scenes, and also create some dialogue for a debate. And then we'll be followed by Shamala and then Chris, who will do presentations, and then Colin is obviously going to moderate the session. So thank you all for joining us, and it's over to you, Colin.
Good morning, all. I'm assuming you can see the presentation in front of you. My name's Colin Herron. I'm going to spend 15 minutes, that's all, just giving you what we agreed was a straw man so that we can challenge where we are within the marketplace. So what I've said is, do we really have a plan to transition from the internal combustion engine? The work that we do as Zero Carbon Futures is we work with cities to try and work our way through the fog of misinformation and try and help people plan for what's really going to happen. The biggest project we did recently was with the Mayor of London, and we produced London's EV vehicle infrastructure plan. And out of that, we've recently done the forward infrastructure plan with the London Olympic Park Legacy Company. Our government has come up with some clear policies. By 2040, every new car and van sold should be effectively zero emission. If you've been watching the press at the moment, we're now talking about a ban on ICE. So the 2040 is now discussed as 2035 or possibly 2030, and some people are also making noises for 2025. And they produced a strategy called the Road to Zero in 2018. So key questions. Do we have a definite policy of which vehicles will be banned by when? Are we confident supply will match any policy? Do we know what people will actually do? What's their habits? Do we have a national infrastructure plan? Do we know which technology will be used for public transport and goods? And have we met any targets to date? This transition process I put forward, which is simply policy, supply, technology, application, and infrastructure. If we know what the policy is of what's coming by when, we can investigate the supply chain. I will put forward that this has been a complete disconnect in the future, that policy has been set on aspiration, not the available supply. Once we know what the supply is, and we then can agree on the technology. Are we going to have battery vehicles? Are we going to have hydrogen vehicles? Are we going to have both? Are we going to have some other interesting propulsion system? But then we have to look at the application. There's personal use, as in your private car. There's people movement, such as trains and buses and coaches, and there's goods movement. Once we understand the technology for the application, we then need the infrastructure. And against the infrastructure, there's basic questions. How much do we need? Where? When do we put it in? What type do we put it in? And who puts it in? The infrastructure question, I believe, is not being addressed fully at the moment. The next question is, do we know what the public will do? We have fast chargers, we have home charging, we have rapid chargers, and we're just starting to get the information of what people will do during the day. There is the old chestnut, we'll all charge at 6 p.m. Well, actually, if you look at the domestic chargers in the middle, we don't all charge at 6 p.m. And we use the rapid chargers at a different time of the day to the fast chargers. However, as we only have about 120,000 battery electric vehicles out of 35 million, and the technology which was in play when we took these graphs is now obsolete, do we truly know what the public will do? So we started doing questionnaires. So the bottom left is, how often do people charge? And you can see people don't charge every day. We also ask the question, do people charge at home? Do they charge at work? These ratios have changed dramatically as more workplace charging comes into play. The other question is, and we got two examples from Greater Manchester and North East England, how long are people actually spending on chargers? Where are they charging? Until we have this picture finalized and we know what people are doing, it's very hard to plan a correct infrastructure. We also have the challenge of numbers and where we are with vehicles. I notice people always refer to the percent of sales and trumpet the number of EVs we have. Using the SMMT figures, you can see how many we've actually got. So we have around 163, or by the end of this year. I've taken the August figure and I just extrapolated it to the end of the year. That gives us all of basically 0.5% of all the vehicles on the road are battery. The total is 1%. In August, there was a big shout about the 77% increase in vehicles. That works out at another 2,400, which actually works out at another 9 per district. So year to date, I would think each district in the UK will get an additional 100 vehicles. Now, this is not a large number. So I always call this beware of the percent. Infrastructure. When I first got into this business, we were installing 3-pin plug 3 kilowatt chargers in Newcastle. If you look on the website, you'll now see the GridServe hub, which is going in, and they want to build these across the country. They can charge 24 vehicles simultaneously up to 350 kilowatts. That is a moot point because none of the vehicles will take 350 kilowatts. But that is the step change which has happened in 10 years. Unanswered questions. We still don't know what powertrain we're going to use for buses. We certainly have no idea for heavy goods vehicles. Trains, we have one camp saying batteries, one camp saying hydrogen. And for aircraft, it certainly won't be batteries because they'll never take off. Is it going to be hydrogen or are we still going to use kerosene? This brings me to my continuing uncertainty formula, which is what other manufacturers are saying by what they're actually doing, because none of them have actually made the volumes they ever said they were going to do, and they tend to quote models produced as opposed to volume. What the politicians are saying changes on an annual basis, and we have to then consider it with what they actually do. Then the press. Now, what the press say can be positive or negative depending on the day of the week. Then we have to bring in physics and reality. What is actually possible? And then we add a sprinkling of hope, which I say is a true variable as it goes from no hope to high hope. We tend to work on the high hope that we hope all of this will happen. This leads to confusion and missed targets. So, summary. In my opinion, do we have a definite policy of which vehicles will be banned by when? No, we don't. Are we confident supply will match any policy, as we don't have a policy and we haven't checked the supply? Again, no. The little yellow triangle is we're starting to understand charging habits. Do we have a national infrastructure plan by how many, type, where and when? No, we don't. It's anybody can put them in anywhere. Do we know which technology will be used for public transport and goods? No, we don't. And have we met any targets to date? Spectacularly, no, we haven't. So that's where I see the position we are at the moment. Thank you. So that's the end of my presentation. And now I'm going to hand over to Shamala, who's going to go through what Coventry are doing. I hope that was controversial enough to get people thinking.
So hello everyone, so I'm Shamala Evans. I'm going to turn my video off, and please excuse me if I turn my microphone off now and then when I've got a coughing fit. So I work for Coventry City Council. I am the lead on electric charging infrastructure. And I would like to share what Coventry City Council has procured services through collaboration and partnering with private sector. So hopefully I can. Okay, so the contents very quickly. I'm going to say why we collaborate. I'm going to talk about a little bit about rapid charging in Coventry, slow and fast charging, smart cities trial. We also have a brand plug-in Coventry, and just go through some photos and usage graphs to date. So actually, why electrify Coventry? Coventry has, it is a very progressive, ambitious and innovative city. But Coventry is under the Air Quality Action Plan and has been tasked to reduce nitrogen dioxide emissions. And Coventry also has a climate change strategy currently being updated and a local AQ action plan. Now, electrification measures has a major presence in both the climate change strategy and the local air quality action plan. Electrification also has a positive economic impact by bolstering local job growth and aligns with central government net zero carbon transport strategy. And Coventry City Council's aspirations is to have a zero carbon transport with sort of projects such as VLR, which is a very light rail, electric buses, electric taxis, electric vans. Coventry is also the trial city for electric scooters, and public electric vehicle charging network are just some of the projects that the city is delivering at present. And this sort of takes me to the next slide. So why collaborate? Now, I would say it's an enabler platform to experience innovation. So responsibility, politics, and enthusiasm, entrepreneurship is why we need to collaborate. I would say public sector brings structure through regulations, legislations, and a platform to showcase the innovation that the private sector brings to the table. I feel that working together, governments, businesses, and entrepreneurs can help towns, boroughs, cities meet the needs of their constituents or growing population. So we have installed 3 or 4 different types of charging network in Coventry. So we have a rapid charging network, 39 chargers, rapid chargers, 50 kilowatt chargers are now operational. We procured funding through OLEF under the ULEF taxi infrastructure project. We procured the supplier through ESPO framework. We carried out a mini competition. We did a 70-30 revenue share, a long-term contract, had an element of R&D involved in the contract where the app has a facility for taxis to book the spaces. The private sector or the supplier invested 25% in the project. We also designed a universal foundation with the foundation, or rather the null, through the null socket with null themselves. And we also have a functionality for civil enforcement officers to enforce restrictions on the spaces. So this was an element of how working with public, or actually a very good example of public and private sector working together. We then also went and procured funding for on-street residential charge points, went out to tender and procured a supplier who also invested 25% in the project, again with Universal Foundation. We sort of basically worked on a initial couple of years fixed term tariff we would be collaboratively discussing any increase with the tariff. Again, R&D with the back office integration with our parking services back office with the bay sensor technology, again, which will allow our civil enforcement officers to enforce restrictions with any ICE vehicles parked in those spaces. And again, over a long-term contract. Another one, we had a partnership, working partnership with a supplier, again, went out to tender, open tender, and EO charging, typically to look at workplace charging scheme. So we wanted a Coventry brand, which we have now available, which is the plugincoventry.org. They provide multiple ownership to businesses in Coventry. It is almost like a endorsed supplier in Coventry who can go and approach businesses. And also on the website there is a form that the companies can fill in, which could start the ball rolling with a number of attractive models that they present to the businesses. And then, not last but least, it's we have a smart cities trial with connected curbs. It's a pilot project at the moment. We've created a smart city charging zone. It would have a air quality monitoring sensor, real-time data available on air pollution levels in the area, and on-street Wi-Fi hotspots via their phone application. Again, I have big hopes of hopefully rolling this out across the city. So these are just some of the photos where we have the rapid 50 kilowatt chargers installed. These are what the slow and fast chargers through on the residential streets. This is the connected curb bank of chargers without any parking spaces allocated. This is a sort of up to August 20 usage data. So Coventry only has about 519 registered electric vehicles according to the DFT stats. And we can see the usage has started to increase. Sort of, you know, it started to creep up. I can't say post-COVID because we are still in the COVID situation, but you can see that there is increase. Now the residential charge points are slightly sort of a very strange kind of usage data coming through, but it is what it is. And this is me finished. I think I'm going to pass this on to Chris now.
Yes, please. Thank you for that.
Hello, everyone. I will just try and get my slides up. So hopefully you should be able to see that. Brief bit of background. So I'm Chris Pateman-Jones. I'm the Connected Kerb CEO. Been in role for about 2 years now. Previous to that was at Ernst & Young and at Bechtel. Rather than sort of talk to you about what we do so much, because hopefully that will come out through this, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about one of the reports that we developed earlier this year. And I think Colin sort of referred to this earlier on. There's beginning to be an understanding of what drivers actually want and how they might be using their or using charging infrastructure to support them adopting EV. And so the question we asked was to really try and further that knowledge. So the question was asked really, how do we move from this early adopter phase? Because I think, as Colin sort of alluded to, everyone who owns an EV in the UK can be classed as an extreme early adopter. Those are people who buy not necessarily for logic-driven reasons, but because they're passionate about the technology, they're passionate about the environment. What we have to try and move to is a situation whereby everyone can adopt EV. everyone in society and everyone from a perspective of whether they are that early adopter or mainstream buyer. To that point, I'd just flag, so Shamala mentioned that we've got a project going on in Coventry, and I think the part I'd allude to on that is we believe EV should be for everyone in society, not just the wealthy. So we don't only pick wealthy areas to go and deploy in. We don't only pick areas with beautiful air quality and driveways everywhere. We actively go and search for locations where we can deploy and actively influence EV adoption. So that's an important part to mention. I think some of the sites that we've picked in Coventry sort of reference that. Just a very brief bit on who we are if you don't know who we are. So I think the quotation mark at the top there, that's our mission statement. Talks about future-proofed infrastructure solutions. That's critical to what we do, about connecting communities, and importantly also green mobility for everyone in society. We do that not just because we're ethically driven, but because it purely makes sense, and I'll explain that in a minute. The kit we've got is fast universal access charging, so it's 3 to 7 kilowatts. We can go up to 22, but in the locations we deploy, we tend to do 3 to 7 because we think it's most appropriate. We work in workplace and in residential charging areas and with fleet. So I think, as Colin sort of suggested, it's very interesting to see workplace charging increasing. We think that's a huge role to play, particularly in urban areas where putting on-street residential charging is more difficult. You can maybe provide that same solution to people at home, at work. The other point is we make our kit out of recycled materials. We've won a lot of awards now around that and around our innovation. It's critical for us that, one, we make EV ownership accessible for everyone, but also that we make the infrastructure as long life, as low visual impact, and as manufacturable from recycled materials as we possibly can. So we use recycled vehicle tyres and recycled plastics for that. The kit's smart and connected, so we deploy fast fibre alongside our charging points. That means that we can do some quite creative things in terms of smart cities, but it also means we can do a whole lot of stuff around load management. And then the market leading reliability. Everyone says this, but the fact that all you see above the ground of our kit is the socket tells you the fact that our charger sits beneath the ground. And the key failure point on charging points is, as many of you on the call will know, is either the socket or the cable. So by separating that from the expensive charging componentry, we improve our uptime. I won't touch on this, it's a little arrogant. The only thing I will say is at the bottom you see here, we were really excited yesterday because we were announced as one of the UN and UNESCO's partners for their 75th year anniversary. That is in recognition of the fact that we can deploy advanced smart cities and charging technology without necessarily affecting the visuals of the street. So enough on us. The question we asked, again, coming back to it, is how do you move from early adopters to mainstream buyers? We answered that question by basically going out to the public, and we polled 1,500 people and then did surveys with a further 500 people, largely of those people who owned EVs. So we're aiming to complete this every 3 to 6 months. We've put some stuff out on LinkedIn about this. We'd like you all to be involved in it. So if there are questions that you want to ask, it's a fairly substantial polling exercise. So come forward and do ask us questions or suggest ones to be involved if possible. We publish all the research. The report came out earlier this month. This is an inclusive exercise, not just something to further connected Kerb. So do come forward with it. Essentially, just to run through some of the highlights of it, and this one hopefully shouldn't shock anyone, but the general perspectives were it's pretty important across society for us to switch to EV. Interestingly, this was done just before the start of COVID. We actually expect, and the initial feedback we've had is that this number's actually gone up. So people are pretty supportive. They're wanting the country to move to electric vehicles for various different reasons. And if you read the report, you'll see we've ranked the reasons and the rationale for people switching. Obviously, climate change and air quality being number one within that. Interestingly, though, we then started to interrogate that data a bit more. So do people want to have charging points deployed across the streets? Again, universally, pretty high support across the different age categories that we surveyed in the UK. So anywhere between 80 and 88%. Very interesting, though, for the images that Shamala just showed and that we all know, there are then question marks around, well, OK, if you then go to those same people and say, well, do you want a charging point outside your home? The numbers change pretty dramatically. So on residential streets, do people want charging points outside their homes? And the numbers decrease dramatically. The working assumption for that, and we'll be testing it the next time we go out to poll, is that that is because most people in the public are, for very good reason, possibly because they're less visually intrusive, are unaware of some of the less visually obtrusive charging points. So most people, we believe in the public, seem to think that charging points equates to big petrol pump style units. And the reality is, I think over time, you'll see people becoming more comfortable having stuff put outside their house where they're more visually discreet. The other part on that is around the use of traffic regulation orders. I think the view is a lot of the members of the public are concerned around the deployment of those things outside their homes because they're going to lose public parking spaces. So I think there's some work to be done on that, and we're doing some interesting pilot projects or proper projects, I should say, with some councils at the moment on that I hope to be able to announce pretty soon. So then to look a little bit more closely at the EV driving habits at the moment, and Colin is the real expert on this, but the data showed us, in line with what I think most of us know from national statistics, over 80% of charging is done at home today. Interestingly, of people who have, of the people we surveyed, we should say, so not necessarily everyone in society, but the 1,500 that we surveyed and the interviews that we did, only 61% of people said that rapid chargers, or 61%, or people said that chargers were rapid chargers were only useful when they were away from home. So what we're saying there is not trying to be negative towards the rapid and the ultra rapids. We're not saying that. We think there is definitely a use case for it, but what it shows you is that people are preferentially looking to charge where their charging experience is quickest, i.e. where they can plug in and go away and do something completely separate, not thinking about charging, and also where they can do it very cheaply. So that is, I think, as Colin sort of alluded to, at work or at home. As I say, there is a use case for the ultra rapids and the rapids, but we think the predominant use of EV charging will be the slower to fast charging, the 3 to 7s. The other part that I think the killer statistic that comes out in the report is, if you look at EV drivers today, the ones that we interviewed, 67% of them would not have bought an EV if they couldn't access overnight charging. Now, critically, what that also tells you is that the vast majority of people who have an EV today, the very, very significant majority, have a driveway at home. So this question that we ask around how do you move to mainstream adoption is also from a social perspective. How do you move so that everyone in society can get access to EV? Because critically, 62% of the population can't home charge. This isn't our statistic. This is from I think it's a Homes England survey from 2018. Again, it's in the report. 62% of the population can't put a charging point on their driveway. So 34% don't have a driveway, and then a further 28% have somewhere to park, but there is no suitable way that they can deploy a charging point in that space. So that is a significant portion of the population who cannot adopt EV if you follow that 67% statistic previously. To follow that on, then the people within our survey who didn't have an EV, 89% of them said they would be encouraged to buy an EV as their next car if they were offered access to charging. So pretty important statistics there. So reflecting on that, early adopters are not the same as the wider population. Early adopters are early adopters. They buy for ideological reasons, not necessarily the logic that most of the rest of us do. There's strong population support for widespread charging infrastructure. Whether they people want them outside of their homes is different, though. Drivers don't appear to be seeking a petrol station model for habitual day-to-day charging. They do want that to help and support them to get over the range anxiety issues, but it doesn't necessarily mean that people will be using those solutions every single day. The costs just don't stack up. The demand appears to be hampered by a lack of infrastructure, along with other things, education, supply of vehicles and so on, but infrastructure is pretty key. And those without driveways face significant inconvenience. We're surprised to date that has had very little focus on within the political debate so far, particularly noting that in urban areas it's largely poorer people on the whole who face poorest air quality and equally have least access to off-street parking. So the key message from it is convenience and confidence in charging infrastructure is key. Convenience in how and where you charge, and then confidence in the reliability of the infrastructure. And it's the message at the moment, unfortunately, and Colin, Shamala, I'd be interested to get your perspective on this, is the message we hear in the market is if you want to buy an EV, it's almost as convenient as an ICE vehicle. Well, to actually get the mainstream to adopt, it has to be more convenient, more reliable than an ICE vehicle. Otherwise, people just simply won't do it. That is it from me, so I will stop presenting.
Thank you both. There's an awful lot in that for discussion going forward. And you've covered a lot of the points I put up in the old straw man. Ladies first, I've got to ask you a question, because it's something which we're observing all over the country. you've obviously got a very strategic plan of what you want to put in Coventry. The challenge that I'm observing is the private sector are also got their own plans of what they want to do in Coventry or Manchester or Liverpool or wherever. So what I'm seeing here is the equivalent of Coventry Council putting rapid chargers near my house, and just up the road in Morrison's, they're putting rapid chargers in, and Aldi are putting rapid chargers in, and Tesco are putting chargers in, etc. But they're doing what they want to do, and they can do what they want to do. So there becomes a challenge between how do we know, as I said, how many chargers are going in? How on earth are we going to make them viable if anybody can put them in anywhere for their purpose going forward? And how nationally can we convert 35 million vehicles if it's just a random installation of charge points of any type anywhere? So the challenge to you in Coventry is you've got your plan, you've gone for your 39 rapid chargers, you've gone for your trial. How can you control what the other people are doing? You know, Shell can convert their petrol stations, BP can put them in there. How can you manage that, or can you not manage it?
Okay, so I will come in there, and you know, like both of you have said, the home charging or workplace charging is where majority of the people do tend to charge at the moment. But one thing, I think awareness is hugely required. People, you don't have to charge your vehicle every day. So
Correct.
as a general rule, from a statistic perspective, between 50 and 70 miles is roughly what people tend to do a week. And I'm not including, employment where it sells people who are traveling, I'm just talking in general. And a vehicle, sort of a 40 kilowatt battery vehicle, would have a range of about, 140, 150 miles. So you're looking at what? Once every fortnight, once every 3 weeks, that you would end up charging your vehicle. Now, in Coventry, there are, I think it is 46 or 47% of the housing market that does not have off-street parking facility. And there is more than 25, 26% areas. There is no way I can go and install a charger on the street because the streets are narrow, the footpaths are narrow, you don't have off-street parking facility, there are no car parks in the nearby vicinity. So what do those people, what will they do? So when you have got the type of on-street charging capabilities available in a city, like the rapid chargers, for example, and you've got the fast chargers, so you change your behavior. And this is awareness, this is education, and it will come with the cost parity. As a city council, we have also installed chargers in across the board, not just where it is where the early adopters are, but having chargers available will give people the confidence to go and purchase when there is cost parity. Coventry also has an inordinate or disproportionate amount of low-income households. There are a lot of MHOs in Coventry as well. So until we have a sort of not either a cost parity, costs come down for vehicles, and we have a second-hand market, a third-hand market, we are not going to see really big uptake from the residential sector in Coventry. However, we do see we want to see the public transport going electric, like the taxis, which black cabs and private hire vehicles. The regulations are now in place where by 2024 we will not renew. We will only renew a zero-emission taxi. So now they are also going to require on-street charging facility. and these 39 rapid charges were part of that ULEV taxi infrastructure project. So they are spread across the city. At strategic levels, we have had, the taxi drivers were interviewed. We asked them, where do you take your breaks? What is your normal routes, within the Coventry area? And that's where they have been installed. So what the Asda's and Tesco's, all the supermarkets do, that's private land, and they can install chargers, and I think that is a very good thing, because when you go shopping you can charge. So if you are unable to charge on your street or in your area, there is a way. You have to find different ways, rather than turn around and say, oh, you only charge at home, you only charge at night. It's great if you can, but there are areas where that is not possible, and they should be able to have chargers.
I think that, so the point is that you as a public sector can have a plan of how many rapid chargers and street chargers you're putting in, but the private sector can put 2 or 3 times as many in at the same time without speaking to you.
Can I just jump in on this? So I think that's an opportunity as well as a challenge. So there's a challenge for some of the public charging networks if they're sort of usurped by some of the private sector organisations putting in. But I guess there's also a question mark as to why those private sector organisations are putting it in, whether it's long-term viability of the charging technology or whether it's a loss leader to get people into shops. So I think that's a question mark over that. I think where the bigger opportunity sits, both for the council and the private sector, is on recognising that some of the problems are shared. So those sort of areas that Shamala mentioned there, in terms of where it's very difficult to put charging infrastructure out, I'd argue there are some solutions out there, but I take the point that it is very difficult in narrow, sort of almost Coronation Street style streets where the pavement is very narrow. I think the interesting part, though, is that in those communities there, or in those areas, typically low income in many instances, not always, but often low income, those same people are often working in locations, factory locations or areas where there is significant employer car parking. And I think there needs to be a greater focus on the data around why we're deploying and how we're deploying, and sharing of that data across public sector and private sector. So we're working with a major employer and a major warehousing business at the moment. And when I look at, we haven't done the analysis yet, but we're trying to look at where those employers are coming, or those employees are coming from, looking at mobile phone data and things like that. So you can track at a general level, not an individual, but to see where people are moving to and from to get to some of those larger states. So you can then basically say, well, I don't necessarily need to put a charging point on that street, or as many as I previously thought, because the vast majority of those people on that street are driving to a park just outside of Coventry, where they're then able to workplace charge rather than home charging. So I think don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it's not hugely complex, but I sort of see there's an opportunity for greater collaboration between the public and the private sector that we're not seeing at the moment.
I would completely agree with that, and I would really like the government to pay heed to that collaboration and the information going back to try and do a strategic plan for the UK.
Yeah.
Peter, have you got some? Sorry,
Colin. I think it's also a massive opportunity for employers. So employers as well.
Actually wanted to.
Sorry.
Question. Yeah.
Sorry, I was only going to say that as a local authority, I do believe that there isn't a solution that one fits all, or different areas, different cities, different boroughs will have different requirements, 100%. But as a city council, and I'm talking on behalf of Coventry, we are trying to reach out, exactly what Chris just mentioned, from the business perspective. We have just started from June a transport webinars with our green business talk within their webinars, where we are talking to businesses. We are explaining to businesses first what the City Council is doing, from different topics, public ground to VLR to the big station master plan we're doing, and the charging infrastructure, with the hope that they will go and speak to their employees, because Coventry also wants to start a electric car club. So it's the areas where, you don't want the second and third car. Find out what is it that you're using those, those second and third vehicles for, and get rid of them, use a electric vehicle. But this is exactly what we want to find out, is what Chris was saying, that where do these employees come from, to Coventry, to all these different businesses, because not all businesses also have car parks. That is another thing we found in Coventry, or I'm finding, is that there are a lot of businesses that do, but there are a number of businesses that have no facility for a car park at all.
Yep.
And they have some decent size employees. So it is a challenge, but I reckon that there needs to be local strategies and local policies that serve the local community, with opportunity charging available for visitors and so forth.
It's how do we match, I believe there's 270 local authorities with a national plan for national movement, where people don't I call it EV sans frontière. There is lots of people who move around the country and visit the country who are not really interested if they're in Coventry or Wolverhampton. They just want to charge their car. Peter, have you got some questions for us? You're on mute, Peter. You're on mute.
I'm mute, so I've not got any background noise, and then I forget. It's age, I think. No, not specific yet. In terms of sort of what you're covering. So.
Are you happy? Because I've got some questions.
Personally, I'm liking having sort of listening through all of this, even when I'm off screen, is the detail that you are covering is pretty sort of extensive. One point, actually, given the fact that lots of businesses within a specific local authority region don't have parking facilities, is there a thought of having an EV sort of ride share scheme where it's on the outer part and people park the cars and they do the last bit either on a bike or a scooter, or a shuttle service?
Yes.
Is that a way of sort of doing it easier?
Yes, we are looking as an authority, I mean, the one authority that has very successfully demonstrated this is Oxford, having a park and ride with charging infrastructure, with shuttles, with electric buses taking people into the city and so forth. It is the sort of availability, the development of something like that. Again, same thing, awareness, education for people, and making it easier, convenient for people to be able to use any mode of transport. People are always looking for the most convenient way to do things. So Coventry has got a park and ride. It doesn't get really used. So it is now looking at repurposing some of the areas, repurposing, I mean, I think, we are completely, a lot of things have been thrown off kilter with the COVID, looking at different ways of, transports. I mean, people are working from home a lot, so the usage has dropped down with the public transport, trains and buses, even taxis, So there is a lot to sort of look at from a strategy level, because it needs to be fluid as well, because we can't set it in stone. The things are changing constantly, and actually putting constraints that this is what you're going to do, then the innovation will stop. So at the moment, there is such a fast moving pace with the technology and what people are thinking, how people are coming up with different solutions. We can't turn around and put a stop to that. So I think the central government is right in what they are doing at the moment. in the sense that they are letting entrepreneurs come to the open platform, if you like, work with local government. It's just that our procurement system is one thing that we can't just go and work with a supplier. We have to go out and procure suppliers. And that is exactly the reason why, is because there are so many new ideas coming, new solutions coming to the market. Yes, we have to trial it. And what better way than to collaborate with the public sector to allow something like that to happen, give that public platform to it.
I think
Chris is about to come in, but could I ask Chris something as well, just before he comes in? How much do you think the government's grant culture is driving infrastructure habit as opposed to the national need for infrastructure? So, for instance, if Coventry bids, it gets 39 rapid charges. If Telford bid, they get none because Coventry won. Is this a sensible way of putting in a national infrastructure, or should we have a national network and a local network? But at the moment, it's who bids wins, and therefore it's a postcode lottery for drivers, that they go to Milton Keynes and it's full of rapid charges. You go to another, maybe Liverpool, and it's 3. Is that sensible?
I think the government is doing a good job, and I think OLEV is trying its best. I think one of the challenges it has is that there is a huge education gap when we speak across the different local authorities. So some of them are completely unaware of OLEV or the schemes that are available, which means that the smarter, or not necessarily smarter, but the more prepared local authorities are snapping up all of the opportunity.
Yep.
I think if you would speak to, and I know you do speak to OLEV, but when you speak to OLEV, their message on this is, we're trying to provide the seed that starts, that then germinates, and then you bring in private funding. So I think actually this doesn't work unless you bring private funding. We don't think. I don't think the government has. I mean, the estimates range from a couple of thousand up to 10,000 charging points per month for the next 10 to 15 years that are required if you're going to put in the public sort of on-street resi charging infrastructure. So the numbers are huge, and I think you need private capital for that. I guess the challenge I would say on that is, again, an education piece. There's a belief within some of the public sector organisations that money will just come because, and I think it's partly because of the precedent that's been set by some of the early market players of a happiness to lose money on deploying charging infrastructure. There's a very big difference between a unsustainable land grab and a long-term viable infrastructure. And I think there needs to be a lot more work on actually what are the long-term concession models, what are realistic, and looking at who tends to back those projects. So long-term infrastructure funders invest in infrastructure, not products. Products last 5 to 10 years. Infrastructure lasts 20, 30, 40, 50 years. So there has to be reasonable conversations, I think, between the public and private sector on that, which I don't think are necessarily always happening early enough or transparently enough. Just very quickly just say on the sort of micromobility and the alternative mode of transport, I think that is a massive opportunity. But I think I think that the key to it is going to be combining the different infrastructures and the different solutions. So there's no point in deploying micromobility if it's nowhere near the EV charging hubs. Actually, you need them to be paired together so that people are incentivized to go and use long dwell charging locations, because then they can use the micromobility pieces. And then the other part where I think the councils can play a really big role is in pushing and almost forcing, possibly through penalising at the start or a mixture of penalties and incentives, the big employers to be doing things like shuttle schemes that are electric. There are a number out there, Zelo and others, who can do this. The problem is then there is a cost associated with it. So that's where I think some of the pressure might need to take place. Anyway, there's a lot to discuss there.
Yeah, can I just come in quickly? Sorry, I can't not say something. It's more to do with what Colin just mentioned about some local authorities bidding and not getting it. I think there needs to be some education within the local authorities themselves. They are not aware of how to bid, It's more a lack of interest, more a lack of knowledge, lack of skills that are available within the local authority. Again, here is where private sector can help the local authorities, and they are. I know that they are helping, that they are talking to private sector, public sectors, and explaining how they can tap into. I mean, you know, it's really strange that the private sector is having to tell public sector the public funding available for them to go and bid for. But this is the reason exactly why I did my presentation, why public and private sector should work together, because they bring the innovation to the table. They bring some solutions, you know, that they can't do things on their own, and neither can the public sector, basically, you know.
We have a big challenge where what you're saying in reality is a national infrastructure is relying on 270 Shamala taking that initiative to have a strategy. But the question I always raise is, how do those 270 individual strategies deal with the conversion of 35 million vehicles? And that, I think, is the challenge that the government haven't quite addressed yet, that we've got 270 fires around the country. We need them to become one big connected thing, but we've got them a bit dotted about, and that's what I'm finding. And that's what I think OLEV's missed. The seeding, they're getting lots of technology, lots of innovation, but I just don't see where this national transition plan is. That's my problem.
Well, I think the fact that they are saying 2030 is a ban on ICE vehicles, you know, we can see changes every year, you know, every quarter, things are different. The landscape is different in different authorities. I think we need to reduce trip mileage, and we need to local authorities need to look at their highway network and what is happening in their city from trip mileage perspective. If they provide the measures to the people will adopt. If the measures are not there and you're just asking people to adopt, they won't. So things, you know, what I'm saying, like providing reliable bus service, providing e-bikes, e-scooters, car clubs, the requirement for second cars would reduce. With COVID, things have been brought to mind, haven't they? That people, I mean, PCP is a popular model within car ownership at the moment. Yeah. So, and when people have got 2-3 vehicles on PCP sitting outside for those duration of 3 months, still having to pay your monthly outgoings for those vehicles, will have made people think or revisit their ownership structure for the vehicles. That is how I'm saying, because I am one of those people. You know, I have also made huge changes myself. So from that perspective, I think reducing trip mileage is a key. Providing measures to reduce trip mileage is, I think, the local authority should be, paying a bit more attention and finding strategic solutions for.
Chris?
Yeah, can I just, so when we talk about this internally at Connected Kerb, within our strategy, we talk about the various different adoption curves that we think are going to happen, and whether there's going to be a 2-tier adoption curve with people who have driveways adopting, and then the sort of more urban, poorer areas of society unable to adopt because of the infrastructure piece. So we talk about all that, but we talk about three things that are going to influence adoption. One is supply and performance of vehicles. The performance of the vehicles arguably is good enough already for people to adopt, particularly the range of vehicles that's coming out at the moment. But the supply and the cost isn't necessarily there. I think what's interesting is then that ties into the education piece, which is that buying an electric vehicle is expensive. There are some amazing short-term lease deals at the moment, or car clubs, which mean you don't necessarily have to buy.
Right,
the lack of education on that is profound.
Yeah.
We all think that it's really obvious, but actually for the vast majority of people on the street, this isn't their day-to-day job, so they're not aware of it. So I think the government could do a lot more around education and controlling some of the advertising as well. You see the stance that the Nordic countries have taken on self-charging hybrids. and the advertising around those. And the UK government is still allowing the messaging to go out on it, despite some of the question marks around whether they are actually green and sustainable. And then the third part, so we do try and do an educational piece. Whenever we go out, we think education should be paired with the deployment of infrastructure, but we can't do it on our own. We're one company, and I think the government could do a lot more on that. But then the third piece is the infrastructure, and I think we've talked about that a lot today. And I think there is some quite good stuff happening. I think we should be looking a lot more to, and I know a lot of the local authorities are doing this, looking at some of the quick wins, the easy wins, and that is in the new house building and the new developments of commercial properties. There's a huge opportunity there. I think the real challenge is in the existing urban environments, and that is where you really need the ecosystem of different parties to come together, the DNOs, together with the hardware providers, together with the commercial and the public sector.
One of the interesting things we found with all the data analysis we've done of rapid chargers is, unfortunately, most of them are hardly ever used.
Yeah.
They're going at a massive rate monthly, huge numbers at a huge cost, but the average utilization is less than 10%. In many cases, it's less than 5%.
Yeah, we would agree, and you'd expect me to say this as a business who doesn't do rapid charges. But again, I'd come back to, we think there is a very clear use case for rapids and ultra rapids, but they have to be deployed in the right places.
Exactly.
At the moment is the message around most rapids is it's a bit of an oxymoron. It's not a rapid charging experience. If you have to drive somewhere for no reason to charge a car, that isn't a rapid experience. It's just not. Whereas if you go the grid serve model, whereby you're using it for very, very long journeys where you need to top up, there's no point in putting one of my charging points there because it'll take you 3 or 4 hours to charge.
Yeah.
But, and it doesn't matter how great their customer proposition is, I don't want to sit there for that long. I want to sit there for 15, 20 minutes. I get a coffee, I go to the toilet, I do whatever. It's about having charging infrastructure that is appropriate for dwell time. And that's what's really missing from the market at the moment. And I think because, again, as we sort of started with this conversation, the conversations to date have been led by rhetoric rather than data. And the market needs to move to this data-driven approach.
I still don't think we're doing evidence-based activities, unfortunately. I think it's still randomized with people's ideas of what we think we need. But I think we've reached the point where the data is starting to come where we can use it. The only challenge I have is I started with a 24 kilowatt hour leaf, which was about 80 miles in the winter. I went to a 30. The people who are buying the cars now are buying the vehicles that I've never driven. So my behavior's changed from 24 to 30. If I got a 50 kilowatt, my behavior would change completely again. So Chris and Shamala, you're trying to guess what people are going to do with the technology that they've never had before. We can't use my behavior because the vehicles I'm driving and I'm currently driving are obsolete. I can't buy a 30 kilowatt hour new Leaf anymore. It doesn't exist.
Your Leaf, somebody else can buy. An AC charger will still charge that Leaf, you know.
Oh, it will.
You see MHO areas, you see low income areas, your 25 or 30 kilowatt is definitely useful to them. You might go to 50 and 70 and 90, 110. That is exactly what I was trying to explain earlier on, that there are authorities where brand new vehicles, regardless of wanting to or have that desire to change, are unable to swap or move to electrification because they can't afford the new models. So they are waiting for exactly what you've just said. Your behavior might change because you've bought a larger battery vehicle. But that 25 kilowatt vehicle will be 100% useful and will be able to charge on these slow AC chargers. They will never be obsolete unless the vehicle becomes a scrap and there is no more 25 or 30 kilowatt or 40 kilowatt battery vehicles available at all. And that is not really going to happen, is it?
No. Can I make a point, really? Sort of listening to all of this and everything that's sort of going on, really, it's coming back to infrastructure. But we have to address all the extra challenges in terms of sales into the public's mind on what it really means. Yeah, and I believe if I'm a new person wanting to move the electric route, yeah, because we've all experienced a cleaner planet since lockdown, or especially when we first took everything off the street. But all this 20 kilowatt, 30 kilowatt, 55 kilowatt, to some, in my opinion, to someone who hasn't yet moved the transition, what does it mean? You know, I would like, if I was buying it, say, well, if you're on this charger and you do an hour, you'll get 10 miles. If it's this charger with this, you will actually get 20. Or you plug in as a new person, and you've probably been there for an hour and a half, and you've gained 12 miles, or 10 miles, or 30 miles. But isn't mileage that counts rather than the sort of kilowatt side? I think personally, on the adoption of actually buying electric vehicles, so we know, or am I being a bit dim, really?
No, I think your vehicle, the battery size of the vehicle is going to tell you what mileage you're going to get out of that vehicle. As far as charging infrastructure is concerned, yes, you do need to know, but within the space, I don't know, within the space of a couple of charging scenarios that you go through, you will soon know how long it takes for your car to charge with what type of charger you're using. That, I think that will come. Even people who are who know a little bit about this would still struggle unless you know where you're very good at maths and you can sit and start doing calculations to work out, oh, it's a 350, well, actually, you don't have, you need to buy something big for 350 kilowatt, but 50 kilowatt charger. If you've got a iPace, for example, with a 90 kilowatt battery, how long will that take for me? I mean, you know, we don't sit there and start working out that. Quite often you top up as a general rule. You know, you don't go down all the way through 10% or something and then go to charge, you know. Those habits happen when you purchase a vehicle. I think knowing the battery size of the vehicle and how much mileage it will do is the key thing that will allow people to decide which battery and the price.
Thank you. Sorry, unfortunately, we have gone over time, and I know Chris has got other schedules to do. Thank you all. This could have gone on and on and on.
Oh, it will.
So
in the background.
But let's look to address as well on different times. What I'd like to see us doing for the future would be a hub that's separate, that's a standalone, that people are invited, get a batch of people on, and have a regular sort of an hour once a month or whatever update and debate about what's going on. But thank you all for joining us, and really appreciated it. And keep safe, and we'll speak soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
folks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.